So we're switching tack a bit in this module. I mean, we're all good with what an image is and the likes. So now it's time to take an application and containerize it, or put it in an image. So first up, we'll cover off what the process looks like from a high level. I mean, containerize an app? What does it even mean? So I figured we better cover that off. Once we're cool with that idea, then we're going to take a web app, like some code, and we're going to make it into a Docker image, and we'll run a container from it. Now to do this, we're going to work with something called a Dockerfile. And we'll see in a second, right? It's just a plain text file with a bunch of pretty simple instructions. But the power of this file is insane. I mean, not only to build an image, I'm talking about the potential to bridge the gap, nay, the chasm between dev and ops. Seriously, this file is a way for developers to describe their apps and how they work, and for ops to read the file and understand. Whew. Anyway, then we'll dig a bit. So we'll get under the covers of what we just did, and I think we'll probably share a few best practices at the same time. Then we'll look at multi-stage builds, which is really taking everything that we're going to learn and making it really production worthy. Then we'll wrap it all up with a solid recap. Now again, as we go, we'll polish off a bunch of stuff from the exam, and again, all from domain 2. So we'll show the main parts of a Dockerfile and describe a bunch of the options. We'll show how to create a production-worthy, efficient image and use a file to create an image, a Dockerfile, yeah? So let's crack on. It is all about the applications. Everything. It's all about the apps. Just making sure you know, which I'm sure you did. Anyway, it all starts with app code, and it all ends with a running app. It's like, once upon a time there was some code, blah, 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 container, 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 and the app ran happily ever after. The end. Anyway, we've got our code, and we're a Docker course, right? So running it means running it in a container. But how do we do that? Well, that is the million Bitcoin question. Okay, well, the process looks pretty much like this. Here's our app code. To get it into an image, we create a Dockerfile. Details to follow, yeah? But this is basically a list of instructions on how to build an image with our code inside. Well, once we've got the Dockerfile, we use the docker image build command to actually build the image. Then it's obviously easy to start a container from that. But that is the flow. Take your app, write a Dockerfile with some instructions in on how to build an image, and point the docker image build command at that. And out pops an image. Job done. So let's go do it. Okay, so, alright, I'm on a Linux machine, but it could be Windows, Raspberry Pi, whatever. The principle's going to be the same. The point is, right, here is some code. And again, look, what the code actually is isn't massively important. The point is, it's code or application, yeah? Now then, to get this code into a container, we need something called a Dockerfile. Now, right from the start, it's normal and probably a good practice to put your Dockerfile in the root folder of your app. Also, it's a bit opinionated about its name, so it is Dockerfile all one word and always with a capital D. Okay. Now all a Dockerfile is a list of instructions on how to build an image with an app inside. But remember, this is going to document the app, so describe it to the rest of the team and to new starts and also to the ops guys. It is a beautiful thing. Okay, so we've got our code, right? And it needs something to run on. The example I'm using here is a Linux app, right? So we need some form of a Linux base image. I'm a fan of Alpine these days, so I'm going to start it from that. Now, it's convention that instructions in a Dockerfile are capitalized. In fact, all this file really is a list of key value pairs, almost. So it goes instruction, usually in caps, yeah? And then value. So we're going from the instruction and then Alpine, the value. Now, you always start a Dockerfile with a from instruction. This is going to be the base image that we add our app on top of. Now, if you remember the best practices from the previous module, you'll remember we said go official and go small. Well, Alpine's an official repo, and it is freaking tiny. I mean, check it out, right? It's like 2 meg compressed and probably about 4 meg uncompressed. So we're official and small. Next up, I'm going to list myself as the maintainer. Now, don't get carried away. I've actually zero intention of maintaining this. It's just a dead simple web app that I only ever use for demos in courses. All I'm doing here, right, is showing you the right way to do things, and also, I guess, how to use labels. But it is normal to list a maintainer, right? So go ahead and list yourself, or maybe your team inbox or whatever, right? It's good for documentation. Okay, well, the app that we're containerizing happens to be a Node app. So we need to install Node and NPM, the Node package manager. Cool. Well, that's what this run instruction here does. It lets us run commands and perform build activities and the likes inside the image, kinda sorta. Again though, we are instruction and then value. Now let me be clear, okay? The from instruction up here pulls the Alpine image and uses that as the base layer for the image that we're building. The label that I'm using here, all that does is adds a bit of metadata to the image config. But then run here creates a new layer. And we'll see it in a second, right? But we'll be taking the Alpine base here and we're adding a new layer with this software that we're installing. APK is just the package manager for Alpine, right? Like apt for Ubuntu and yum for CentOS and, I don't know, chocolatey maybe for Windows. The point is, we're adding some software to the image so we get a new layer. Anyway, next, we want to copy in our source code. So everything from the same directory as our Dockerfile here, and we'll copy that into /src in the image. Well, guess what? We're adding more content, so we get another layer. All right? Right, well, we'll set the working directory to /src. We won't need a layer for that, it's just metadata. Next up, we want to install our dependencies. So npm install here is going to run against whatever is listed in packages.json. Look, the details are not important. What we care about is it's the run instruction again. And like before up here, it is running commands to install and build stuff. So this one we were installing Node itself and npm. Well, now down here, we're using it to install our dependencies. And again, it's adding content. So, you know it by now, we get another layer. This particular app listens on port 8080, so we'll expose that, just metadata again. And then last but not least, right, we need to run an app. So node, and we'll tell it where the app is. And this is relative to workdir up here, okay? Anyway, these here don't really create layers, just metadata in the config. Set the working directory, expose a network port, and specify an app to run when we start a container from it. So, we've got our code. For this example, it's a Node.js app. For you, right, it can be totally different. Go, .NET, whatever it is you do, you've got your code. You've also got your Docker host as well. Now that's got to be running the right platform and architecture. So 64-bit Linux or Windows or Raspberry Pi, yeah? That's got to match what your code is written for. Then we write the Dockerfile. That says how we take the app and build an image from it. For us, we're starting out with a slim base image from the official Alpine repo. A bit of metadata setting me as the maintainer, add a new layer with Node and the likes getting installed, add our source code in as a third layer, I think, yep, a fourth layer building in dependencies, and then some final bits of metadata saying, okay, set the working directory to /src, the app runs on port 8080, and you know what, when you start a container from the image, make sure that this is the app that runs. So yeah, 4 layers. We should remember that, right? 4 layers and some metadata. Well, time to build it, I think. So from within the directory of our source code and our Dockerfile, right, we'll go docker image build. Docker build on its own works as well, right? Well, we'll tag this one as PS web. And then the dot here says use the current directory as the context where the code is, yeah? And away that goes. Now then, to keep the momentum going, I'm going to bend a bit of space-time. Right, that's finished. Okay, And we'll get under the covers a bit in the next lesson, right? But the image is built and it's tagged, so we're done. That means if we do docker image ls, there it is, PS web and only just built. Tell you what, let's run a container from it. Well, that'll be docker container run. We'll run this one detached, right, so it doesn't steal our terminal. And you know what, it's just a web app, right, so it can tick away in the background. We'll call it, whatever, web 1. It runs on port 8080, so I'm going to map that to 8080 on the host as well. It's host container like this. And we're going to run it from that PS web image that we just built. So I guess moment of truth. Okay, we're good. That's the container ID. Which means if we open a web browser here, this is the server the container's running on, yeah? And it was 8080. And there we are. That's our app. So from source code to running web server in like whatever that was, probably less than a minute if you take out my waffling. But I think pretty flippin' cool, yeah? Now, if you're on Windows or Raspberry Pi or whatever's your thing, right, the commands and the process are the same. I mean, sure, you're not going to run a Win32 app on Raspberry Pi, but assuming you've got your app on the right architecture, the process is the same. Code, Dockerfile, Docker image build. Simples, right? Have some of that. Well, that's cool and all, but let's take a look at what went on under the hood. So we